Wow. An incurable, progressive, deadly disease. The only incurable deadly disease in the world that I know of which denies its own existence, hides from us, hides the facts from us, teaches us to deny and to rationalize and to become self-deluded about it, about the very existence of the disease itself. Top of the page. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. Now it's interesting here because remember we've got a whole chapter called There Is a Solution. Dr. Silkworth is making it clear that he believes there is a solution. So what does this do to the apparent hopelessness that we carry in here with us? See how important it is for new people to read this, to become familiar with what's being said here, because there is hope for everybody. There is a solution. He goes on to say this: about 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. That's pretty serious. Now we're getting down to the point of feeble-mindedness. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called in to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I had talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. Remember what the promise is, guys, back there in the promises? That our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Remember when we get to the third step what it tells us? We were reborn. There's a total rebirth of thinking. Remember what it tells us, that when the spiritual malady is overcome, we will straighten out mentally and physically. You can watch the transformation of newcomers within weeks. Not months, but within weeks. The whole thing, their face changes, their expression changes, their carriage changes. Everything about them begins to change. There's a smile on their face, there's a lilt in their voice, there's optimism. Where before there had been a nervous, despairing, trembling wreck. And a lot of us in here have experienced that. We know what the doctor's talking about. Going on, he says, when I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. Well, I guess all of us have found out how illusory this idea of willpower really is. And yet so many people are insistent that we should exercise our willpower. And if we only had a little more willpower, a little bit more motivation, we would be able to stop drinking or modify our drinking. And yet we have to find out, and we have to accept the fact that there is no such thing as stopping drinking on willpower alone. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. Now, moral psychology, you notice the use of the word moral there, because Dr. Silkworth was really not much into religion or religious ideas, but he was certainly a student of morals and ethics, and he believed in that. And he was right in the same class with some other psychologists and psychiatrists who were beginning to understand that in order for them to be effective with their clients and their patients, they were going to have to take into account the spiritual side of the patient's lives as well as the medical and mental side. Top of the page, next page. However, he did become sold on the idea contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. Now then, this last little sentence is so important, because we have to remember where it's coming from and the circumstances under which it comes. Let's see what Dr. Silkworth says. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. And though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. The last word in the doctor's opinion is pray. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. Now, that's exactly what we learned in the 7th chapter. Please turn now to page 95. Page 95 is discussing how we work with a new person. We've taken him through as much as we can up to this point. We've told him about ourselves and how we drank. We've told him about the disease. We've told him how we recovered. On page 95, the 3rd paragraph. If he is sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read this book in the interval. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. Please notice that the word "this book," it does not say some parts of this book or a Leader's Digest expurgated version of this book or an as your sponsor sees it part of this book, but the book. Read this book in the interval. And there's a very good reason for that. We'll discuss that in a minute. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. And we forget that a lot, guys. Somehow or another, we think that we are so articulate and we are so convincing that we can take the new person and somehow or another talk them into the idea of working the steps and getting sober. The big book tells us just the opposite. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. We cannot force any of this to happen.